Is this the end of an era for sewing patterns? Welcome to Sewing Report Live. I'm Jen. I do news and commentary on everything going on in the world of sewing and crafts. And I want to have an honest discussion about what is going on in the world of sewing patterns. This is going to be sort of a chatty one. So sit back, relax, grab a snack, because I want to get into some of the aspects of the sewing pattern industry, everything that's been going on. So we've seen the end of Joann's. Michaels has now purchased Joann's intellectual property and many of the private label brands. And then we also just got news that the parent company of the big four sewing pattern brands has been purchased by a liquidation company. So who knows what's going to happen with that? I know there's a lot of speculation. So we've all gotten so used to paying 99 cents, $1.99 for paper sewing patterns. And the question I want to ask all of you is, can that last? Is it sustainable? Is this the end of us paying so little for paper sewing patterns? And I want to talk about some of the other things that may be impacting this corner of the sewing industry. All right, so I've seen a lot of the comments that y'all have left me on the last couple of videos. And I've got some opinions on everything that's been going on. So we've all rushed to the store to take advantage of the pattern sales, whether it be McCall's, Butterick, Vogue, Berta Style. There's also Janome patterns. And those were sort of the legacy sewing pattern brands. And I personally am a big fan of paper sewing patterns. In fact, I got started a lot on some of the big four patterns. I know there's some of y'all who don't really care that the big four patterns potentially might be going away, but I do think that there is a place for these brands in the sewing community. I know there's been the rise of a lot of independent sewing pattern designers, and I think they've added a lot to the world of sewing. I really do. But I also think there is something about these legacy sewing pattern brands. So for one, I think the ease of access to becoming a sewing pattern designer over the past, say, 10 years or so has gotten a lot easier for just anybody to, whether you can have a design background, or a lot of people really don't, and they just started sewing during the pandemic. This is a pattern I purchased recently from Noodlehead. It is the crescent tote. I've sewn quite a few Noodlehead patterns. I find the quality to be good, adequate instructions. I've seen a lot of sew-alongs for these in blog form and on YouTube. And the world of sewing has certainly changed, especially over the past few decades, but the way we sew now in 2025 is much different than someone sewing in, say, 1925. We have access to so many more resources that previous generations did not. So in a way, I think sewing and designing in many aspects has gotten easier and more accessible to more people. Think about it. Even 100 years ago, there really weren't this level of sewing education stuff. There was no YouTube, there were no blogs, there was no Instagram, and if you wanted to sew, you were relegated to your own local community to pick up knowledge, to learn from others. A lot of people in the past probably made their own patterns or did a lot of self-drafted stuff. I'm sure there were patterns to some degree. I don't know, I forgot when these pattern brands started, but I think suffice it to say, someone 100 years ago did not have nearly as many resources as we do today. And now you could go to a big box, again, up until recently, you could go to Joann's and you could take advantage of the pattern sale and get literally paper patterns, envelope, basic instructions, and tissue patterns for $1.99. Now, there's been a lot of speculation over how these big box stores were able to price things so low. Maybe it was a loss leader. I've also seen people saying that these stores got the first few patterns of a design for free, so that's why they were able to sell them so cheaply, and then that got people into the store. But I think one thing that's happened from relying on, like if you look at the back of this pattern, McCall's, the retail price is at $19.95. I think I probably paid $2.99 for this from the online sale. And we've all just gotten conditioned to expect that pricing. And a lot of us had trouble paying, like, would you want to pay $20 for this? I don't know, because there were so many sales. And I think that's one negative to retail, is that with all of these sales, you don't want to pay, nobody wants to pay full price for anything. Let's be real. If you don't have to and you know there's another sale coming around, you're just going to wait until the next sale, and then you're going to try to pick up a pattern then. I'm not sure what's going to happen in terms of in-store shopping for these sewing pattern brands. I'm not sure if Michaels is going to start to carry more of these patterns. Not really sure. I know some Walmarts have carried these brands in stores. I'm not exactly sure where they're at with it, but I think it's one of those things where if there's less demand for a product, a major retailer is going to be less likely to want to carry it in store and to dedicate shelf space and room for it, especially if fewer people are buying these items. So, and that's one issue that I think Joann's had, is that they were starting to carry more and more home dec items, more crafty stuff, toys, like stuff that had nothing to do with sewing and crafts. But you also have to ask, would they be doing that if the demand for sewing supplies, fabric, and sewing patterns was still there? And I think that's a question that's kind of hard to answer, but we also have to deal with the reality that in 2025, fewer people are sewing than in previous times. That's just what's going on. I know it seems like everyone around us is sewing because you're on Instagram, you're on YouTube, you're on TikTok, and you follow all of these sewing influencers, but in real life, there's just not that many people who are really into sewing as a hobby. Like, that's just anecdotal, and I haven't been able to find any like hard numbers, but I feel pretty comfortable saying that fewer people are sewing now than 50 years ago. I think there's a number of different reasons for that. We also have to look at outside external factors into why sewing might not be as popular as it used to be. And one of those reasons is fast fashion and the mass production of clothing. People used to sew items more for utilitarian purposes, and that's not really an issue anymore, especially with companies like Shein, Temu, the Forever 21s, which I think they're going out of business. But the fact that clothing now is so cheap, again, we're not going to get into all of the factors why that is, but clothing is so cheap that a lot of people don't have those same utilitarian reasons to sew that they might have had in the 1980s, the 1970s, the 1960s. So I think when you look at the like sewing pattern business, you can't ignore those external factors where, yes, I could make this blouse, but I could also go online or go on Amazon and purchase something that looks something kind of like it for $10. And even if I'm paying $2 for this sewing pattern, then I have to buy the fabric. And fabric has gotten a lot more expensive, especially I've even noticed major changes over the past decade or so. For good quality fabric, you're going to pay, you could pay $10, $20 a yard for fabric. And for a lot of for the average normie, it's probably not going to make a lot of sense to get into sewing as a hobby, buy all the equipment, the learning curve of trying to figure out how to sew clothing, when they could just go online and get something from Shein for $7.99. Is the fabric great? No. Is the fit going to be perfect? No. But for a lot of the average consumers who are price sensitive, that's going to make a difference. And at this point, sewing to save money in most cases just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, as far as the price of the sewing patterns, in my opinion, no, even if some of these other retailers do pick up some of the simplicity brands, I would not be surprised if we stopped seeing those deeply discounted sales. I could more see the new norm for sales. Like I'm noticing this when you look at the Simplicity sales now. The sales are probably going to be more, think like $4.99, $3.99. Like the cheapest I've seen Vogue patterns online is $4.99. Occasionally I've seen some of the other brands at $3.99, but I think moving forward we're not going to see much lower than that from the big four companies. And I can see why. I don't think that pricing sewing patterns at $1.99 long term is going to be sustainable for this business moving forward. Now, we don't know what Hilco Capital, the liquidation asset management company that purchased DG Americas, which is the parent company of the Simplicity brands, we don't exactly know what they're going to do with this particular division. No idea. But I think one thing is kind of set in stone, and that's I think the days of us paying so little for a paper sewing pattern, I think those days are over. So for all of you who did hoard patterns and did stock up during those really insane sales, hey, you're probably like, I feel pretty good about myself right now. And you know what? I can definitely understand that. I myself am guilty of overbuying because some of the patterns were just so cheap. Now, Simplicity has a lot of intellectual property. They've got all of these patterns from decades and decades, and there is a lot of value in that. So I don't exactly know what direction they will go in the future, but they could lean more heavily into selling the patterns digitally, the PDFs. That probably is a much lower cost than producing physical paper sewing patterns, having to fold them. I know there's I think this company has like the only tissue pattern printer in like the United States or in the world or something. So they may lean more into the PDF patterns in that realm. I don't think they should be charging the same price for a paper sewing pattern compared to a PDF pattern. I do think there should be some price disparity there, because if I'm gonna be real, I prefer paper sewing patterns. I just do. I like the tactile feel of them. I like unfolding them. I don't like printing out 18 pages on my printer, cutting things out and taping things together. I hate doing it. I would rather pay for a paper sewing pattern. And I did a video on my main channel, The Sewing Report, of just how to trace over your paper sewing patterns so you can keep the originals intact but still have a paper copy. So I do that a lot. But when, I'll admit, when I was able to pay like $1.99 or $2.99 for a pattern, I would just get duplicates and then I would just cut up one and I would still have another copy if I really liked a pattern. So I purchased duplicates of quite a few of the big four patterns because it was so, they were so inexpensive. Now, would I do that if the patterns were $8.99? No. Then I would just have one copy and then I would just keep tracing over it. That's what I would do. We also have to look at the future of sewing, and there's going to be a lot of new technology that comes out, such as sewing pattern projection use, the Ditto sewing pattern projector, and we may see a world in the future where instead of getting a PDF pattern or getting a paper pattern, you may get a file that you can project onto a cutting surface and then cut it out. It's almost like a PDF pattern, but you don't have to worry about all of the paper stuff or printing stuff out, taping it together. So I do think that the technology of projecting your pattern directly onto the fabric, I think actually could really help this business model, because then even if you're not selling the sewing, you don't have to worry about all of the sewing pattern manufacturing. Then people can just get the file. Doesn't take up any space, also doesn't have there's no physical cost of producing it, storing it, shipping it. Everything is digital. And I think we are gonna move into a more digital world in terms of sewing. We're already seeing this. A lot of machine embroidery stuff is digital. You're buying digital designs. I have a Brother Sketch embroidery machine, and that has like everything. There's the Brother Art Spirit app, so you have to transfer all the files there. A lot of sewing machine manufacturers like Singer and even some of the others are trying to do digital worlds, like was it Creativa or something? That's the Singer one, I think. And we're probably going to move more into a subscription-based model. Like I have a Ditto pattern projector, and that is now a subscription-based cloud thing where it's an app and then everything is digital, everything is stored on the cloud. You have to have the internet to use it. So that I have some real mixed feelings about that, because I think that there's some good and bad with that. I do think there's some annoyance and dangers with relying completely on the company support to use a physical item you bought. I'm not a big fan of that, and y'all know my feelings on that. I really do not like subscription-based stuff, or having to rely on a company to support a product digitally in order to use it. Like, for instance, the Brother Art Spirit app. If Brother stops supporting the Art Spirit app, then your machine is useless. If the Ditto sewing pattern projector stops supporting their app, then you have a useless device. And that is one of the dangers with relying on technology in order to use something you purchase. Like, I'm filming this right now on a Canon camera. Imagine if I needed to subscribe to a Canon app in order to use a camera I purchased. You know, if Canon shut down and stopped supporting said app, I would not be able to use this for filming videos anymore. I'd be pretty pissed off about that. So a couple other aspects I want to talk about with the sewing patterns is, all right, so let's compare it to the indie sewing pattern designers. There's so many popping up. I think there's been some truly talented designers that bring new things to the table, that have creative designs, that do a lot more in terms of customer support, education. They have sew-along videos. And then there's some really great indie patterns, and then there's some really bad ones. I've seen some, in fact, I purchased some, and it can be hard to vet, especially when you're on your Etsy, where some of the patterns are better quality than others. And, you know, that can be a little tough for you as a consumer to really like sift through the weeds, find the good ones from the bad ones. And I think one of the negatives about anybody being able to become a pattern designer is just that. Anybody can become a pattern designer. I've also seen a lot of folks that are a little bit nervous about buying patterns on Etsy, because there have been some like very sketchy AI pattern shops popping up, and where the pattern literally was created by AI instructions, probably written by like Chat GPT, and not made by a real person. So I definitely can understand the frustration with that, but I want to say this in terms of AI, and some of you might not like this, but I'm looking at this from a pragmatic, realistic perspective. All right, one, this is the worst AI will ever be. From here on out, it's only going to get better. And my prediction is that in the future, AI pattern designing will probably be nearly indistinguishable from a person designing a sewing pattern, knitting, crochet pattern, whatever you want to, whatever realm it's in. I know there's a lot of AI haters out there, and I just want to tell you, the chances of us using AI patterns in the near future is probably it's probably going to end up happening. We're all using AI to some capacity already. I do think that AI is going to be a useful tool, not only for creatives and designers, but also for the home sewists in terms of helping you to sew. Imagine this. We're already starting to see this with some of the select Ditto sewing patterns, where you can input your measurements and it will spit out a pattern you can project onto your fabric that's custom made for your body. And that's kind of crazy, but that's already there, and the tech is only going to get better over time. like if I go online, I see a lot of people asking, like posting an inspo photo, and they're like, hey, does anyone know of a sewing pattern like this, because I'd like to make this dress. Imagine if you could input like that into some sort of AI tool and it spits out a custom sewing pattern just for you with your exact measurements, instructions, maybe like create like a sew along video tutorial to teach you that's like custom for you. We're already going to be seeing this with e-learning as well, where we're probably going to get AI instruction so good that it can tailor you wanting to learn anything that's specifically just for you and your learning style. That's probably going to come to sewing in some capacity. If you're going to sit there and say, yeah, I'm never going to use AI in terms of sewing, like that's BS. You're going to be using it. If it's good enough and it helps you and it gives you a competitive advantage, especially if you're using sewing for business purposes or creative stuff, or if you're a professional creative, you're going to be using AI tools. Like, quite honestly, you're going to be left behind if you don't use those tools. So it is in your best interest to use anything that gives you a competitive advantage. So I think this idea that sewing, crafting, knitting, crocheting is going to be insulated from AI that's not going to happen. We're all going to be using AI stuff 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And you have to keep in mind, AI technology right now is the worst it will ever be. And it's already pretty good, and it's already getting freakishly better every single day. So I think the elephant in the room for us all talking about sewing and crafting, knitting and crocheting and fiber arts and any sort of art form is that AI is going to disrupt this world in ways that you can never predict. It's just going to happen. And the other thing you also have to keep in mind is that's going to impact, especially the world of sewing, garment sewing, in ways it's going to have an impact on who is going to pick up sewing as a hobby. So imagine this. Right now, one of the common reasons I see for people sewing is, well, I can't find clothes in stores that fit me, or I want this very specific thing that I can't find in stores, so I'm going to make it myself. I want to make a Halloween costume. I want to make custom baby clothes. I want to make a custom quilt. We're probably not very far away from a day when there's going to be some fashion startup or some sort of clothing startup where you're going to be able to do that without making it yourself, where you can tell this AI technology tool thing, where you can say, I would like a green dress with these features. Here are my measurements. I want it, this much ease in it. I want this specific fabric. And there's going to be some way to manufacture that for a relatively cheap cost. So I think when we get that thing, and we're probably not that far away from it, you've just wiped out one of the major reasons for people sewing on a utilitarian level. So will there always be people that sew for fun because they enjoy it, they want to learn new things, and they want to enrich themselves? Of course. But we also can't pretend that a major factor in sewing is people doing it for a pragmatic reason. And if you take away that reason and you get to the point where someone can get from an idea to a finished item, it's cheap, they don't have to do anything, it's much easier, it's convenient, and it's better than they could have done. Like, you'd have to be crazy to think that most people aren't going to take that easier, cheaper route than take the harder, more expensive, labor-intensive path of buying a sewing pattern, learning how to sew, buying a sewing machine, getting the fabric's expensive, and then taking all that time to do it, especially in a world where a lot of us we're very busy people, a lot of us do not have the leisure time to take up sewing as a hobby. So I'm not even convinced that more people will be sewing in the future. If anything, I can see a world where people are sewing less because there's so much new tech where people don't even have to sew for those reasons. Like for instance, you know, it's some things for me are hard to purchase in terms of clothing because yeah, my body type, you know, I'm not a supermodel. I've got some measurements that are not, you know, real standard. Let's just say that. But in a world where, you know, I could go on an app, I could take a picture of myself, it automatically, and I think there's already, I believe I've seen a suit manufacturer that does this where, or a clothing, it's like a menswear clothing startup where somebody could take you load up the app, you take a bunch of pictures of yourself from different angles, and it automatically detects your exact size, weight, height, all your measurements, and they create a custom suit for you based on the measurements. And that wasn't even that recent. That was a few years ago. You're going to see more and more innovations like that to where a lot of people who might be motivated to sew for those practical reasons, you just taken that away. So again, I know we don't like to think about those things, but that's coming. And I think if you don't get on that train, you're probably going to get run over by that train. I'm just being realistic here. So as far as the future of sewing patterns goes, I think it's a little bit hard to predict even the near future because of all of the disruptions we're probably going to be seeing of the fashion world, clothing manufacturing, technology. I know a lot of us don't really want to go to a world where you're not using paper sewing patterns anymore and you're getting some projector gadget thing and beaming it down on your fabric. We're already here and it's only going to get better. And I do think that if the tech gets a lot better, more and more people are going to be using it. But also as the world of clothing manufacturing and designing changes, that's also probably going to have a major impact on the sewing industry. Maybe there's also going to be some really cool new stuff that will encourage people to sew, new stuff online, you know. And I think the world of social media has also been a benefit to the sewing world just because we can share more easily, we can see what other people are making, you can get inspired. I think there's some pros and cons to technology. I think this era of us paying $1.99 for paper sewing patterns, guys, I think it's probably over. Moving forward, the new norm is probably going to be significantly more. The other thing I do think will also have ramifications is on the world of indie sewing patterns, because right now there's a huge price disparity between the big four sewing patterns on sale and the indie sewing patterns. I've seen indie sewing patterns for $20 or $30 USD. And I do think that if the price of the big four patterns goes up, that also could be beneficial for some of the indie pattern designers who are competing with $2.99, $1.99 for patterns. So that could be beneficial for some of these up-and-coming indie designers if their prices don't seem that bad compared to the big four. Now, like I've even seen some, and you know, I'm a very price-sensitive consumer myself. If I'm seeing two sewing patterns, one is an indie pattern and the other is the big four, the indie sewing pattern costs $18 and the big four pattern is $2.99. I'm gonna be real, the big four pattern is gonna be a lot more appealing just based on price alone. Now, there are other aspects I look at when I'm shopping for sewing patterns. Is there like tutorial material? Is the quality of, you know, the pattern better? Sometimes I find there's a lot you can gripe at and criticize with some of the big four patterns, like some of their choices of finish, like seam finishes. Sometimes I'm like, really, is this the best way? Or sometimes I've been doing a pattern and I just think that their way of doing things is not the best way of doing things. Like I was doing one pattern and they required you to do like, they were having you like fold in like a shoulder seam or something, when I personally felt that bias binding would have been a better method of doing it. So sometimes like, now I do think the big four patterns, they've always been widely accessible to people, and I do think the price has been attractive to newcomers into the sewing community. But I also think if you're a more intermediate to advanced sewist, I think one good thing is you're at the level then where you can look at the pattern and say, hey, the directions say to do it this way, but I'm going to do it this other way, and you can do that. So a lot of us can work with the big four patterns, even if we don't always agree with their methods of a certain sewing technique. You might think this other thing might be better. So if the new norm for pricing the big four sewing patterns goes up substantially, even if it's like $5, $7, that might actually help out some of the indie pattern designers that tend to be priced a lot higher just because these are people doing it on a smaller scale. Often these are solo or very small operations, and a lot of these pattern designers do take a lot of pride in putting out high quality patterns with a lot of testing, quality assurance, and a lot of instructions. They put the time into doing a lot of sew along videos. And to their credit though, I have seen some of the big four brands putting out more complete step-by-step, start to finish tutorials. And I think that's a good move, very good move, because one thing that a lot of people do complain about with these legacy brands is that there's not enough adequate instruction, especially for beginners. And we could also kind of clown on the fact that sometimes like the pattern will say like very easy or beginner friendly, and you look at the instructions and you're like, I don't know if I agree with this, not sure if I really think this is beginner friendly. So I've gone through some frustrations myself with some of these patterns. But that being said, though, I do think they're a good standby for just, your basic sewing stuff. I do like that on the pattern envelope, they tend to have like the sizes, it's easy to understand. And I feel like with these brands, you know what you're gonna get, and it's fairly consistent in terms of the quality. And that's one struggle I have when I'm trying to look for new up and coming indie pattern designers is sometimes I purchase patterns and I was kind of disappointed. I'm like, is this it? Or people are selling patterns where I'm like, there's not enough instruction, there's not enough, or sometimes I don't find the pattern to come together very easily. They can be kind of frustrating sometimes. I've been disappointed. Believe me, I felt buyer's remorse over some indie patterns I've purchased. And now I've designed a couple like free templates myself. I wouldn't even call them patterns. It's like some little project stuff that's not based on sizing. And I put them out for free because the level of standard that I would hold myself to of putting out a paid pattern is just not something I can feasibly do in terms of doing all this testing or doing like a full out written instructional booklet. So again, I have video only tutorials. I have made a few very basic templates that I've put out in the sewing report, and I don't charge for them just because I don't feel like the level of quality for the pattern needed to put out a paid pattern. I just don't feel like I'm there. I don't want to be a pattern. I don't really want to make a living as a pattern designer. I make money. I monetize my content in other ways. So that is why I've chosen to put out all of my stuff for free, is because the level of expectation I have on a paid pattern, I just don't think I could do just from my level. I don't have the time for it. I don't have the skill set to do it. But that being said, maybe in the future there might be tools to make that easier. So I know this has been kind of a rambly video, but I just wanted to put some thoughts out there on what's going on in the world of all of these sewing related, crafting related businesses, the patterns. I think we're going to see a lot of changes we can't anticipate. So I'm just telling y'all, watch out for those. And I think if you are a creative and you make a living doing this, or you're in the sewing industry, I think one thing you're going to have to do is adapt to some of these changes. I think if you don't, you're going to get left behind. I've been doing this full time for about 8 years. I can't tell you how many times I've had to make significant changes in how I operate. Otherwise, I would not still be able to be doing this for y'all. And we're just going to have to keep doing that. So I do think that the idea that you can keep the same business model for 50 years is not like realistic at all. You're gonna have to change with the times, change with technology, change with just the shift in consumer trends, a shift in buying trends, and also there could be some unrelated businesses that disrupt what you're doing, even if they're not doing the same thing. Like if we get some custom clothing startups where you can get whatever you want made at a fairly reasonable price, whatever fabric you want, whatever different features you want on this particular article of clothing or thing, that's really going to take away a lot of the big reasons we currently have to sew. Also, kind of related, but we did just get an email. If you're on the Joann's mailing list, I just got a coupon. It's from like a Joann's Michaels message, and they sent an in-store only coupon where you can save 50% off of any one regular priced item, valid now through Saturday, June 28th, 2025. So it does look like Michaels is really trying to get some of the former Joann customers into the doors. They're pushing over 10,000 styles of fabric online. The yarn brands are going to be carrying Big Twist in the fall. I did reach out to Michaels to ask if they're going to be, I reached out to their PR contact to ask a few questions, and I did specifically ask if they are going to have plans to carry some of these sewing pattern brands. Did not get an answer back from them. I'm probably not going to. I'm a YouTuber, so they're probably not going to respond, but I did put out the inquiry. But let me know some of your thoughts on the future of sewing and the future of sewing patterns. I think we're going to be sewing much differently 10 years from now than we are currently. And I think there's going to be stuff that pops up that none of us are ever going to guess is going to be a thing we can do. So those are my thoughts. I also think I'm probably going to do another video specifically talking about how AI could really change the sewing industry, the fashion industry, because I think that, guys, that train is coming. We can't stop it. No matter what we do, it's here. Do I agree with everything and do I love it? Not necessarily. This is just the pragmatist in me that's telling you cannot ignore AI. It is coming and it is going to disrupt everything we know about sewing and craft. So let me know what you think down below in the comments. I do have some community rules I have posted in the pinned comment. So if you are going to leave a comment, be sure to check the rules. Also, if you found this video interesting, informative, crazy, subscribe to Sewing Report Live, where I do news and commentary videos. You can also check out my Etsy shop, sewingreport.etsy.com, for a curated selection of fabric and sewing supplies, or my main channel, The Sewing Report, for some straight up sewing, embroidery, craft videos. I'm Jen with Sewing Report Live. I'll see you again soon.